If you work in quality control at a candy factory, you know strict safety regulations come with the job. It's why you partner with Grainger. Grainger helps you find the high-quality and compliant products your business needs to inspect, detect, and help correct issues. And the sweetest part is, everyone gets a product that's as safe to eat as it is delicious. Call 1-800-GRAINGER, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
Hello listeners, and welcome to this bonus episode of the Cult Vault. I'm your speaker Casey, and this instalment is shorter than usual after a technical glitch left our first interview corrupted. My guest today kindly agreed to re-record, so we found a time to reconnect and bring you this brief conversation. Elizabeth Gilpin's memoir, Stolen, follows the author's journey through ill mental health, educational consultants, a traumatic wilderness program, going on to depict her time in an abusive boarding school within the troubled teen industry. Elizabeth's book will be one of two on the monthly memoir giveaway program across the month of November, so head on over to @cultvaultpod on Twitter or Instagram and get involved in the giveaway for a chance to win Elizabeth's book Stolen or Kristen Decker's 50 Years in Polygamy, Big Secrets and Little White Lies. I will put a link to Elizabeth's book in the episode description. And now on to today's bonus content. So hello, Elizabeth, and welcome to the show. Thank you so much for agreeing to come back and chat with me for a second time to redo our episode all over again after the last conversation we had got corrupted on my laptop. Would you like to start by introducing yourself to the listeners?
Yeah, hi, I'm Elizabeth. I wrote the book Stolen. I'm like, is this where I tell you what my book is about? I wrote a book about my time in an abusive boarding school, and I guess wilderness program as well. It's like a two-part book.
And I love that about the book as well. In the first episode that we did together, I talked about how it was the first time I really got a deep insight into somebody's experiences leading up to a wilderness program and then their time in the wilderness program and transition into a so-called therapeutic boarding school, which is what the book Stolen does so well, which I really appreciated being able to kind of give some more context to those situations that kids find themselves in. Can you start by painting the picture for us of why it was that your parents decided to place you into a wilderness program in the first place?
You know, there's so many, I feel like I can't decide if my answer is the same every time or evolves a little bit, but I think the root of it all is that at the time that I was, if you would like to say, acting out, which was, 15 years ago now, these schools and programs were just starting. You know, there was no research on them. There was nothing out there about them. I'm pretty sure shortly after I was in the woods, there was even a reality TV show about it called Brat Camp. So I think for a moment they were glorified and parents believed that these were that quick fix miracle they had heard about. My opinion, I've heard mixed reviews by reading the reviews, is I did not need to go there. That being said, I don't think anyone needs to. It should ever be in a place that is taking away your human rights, especially as a minor, that's abusing you. I needed therapy. I was angry. I was depressed. I didn't understand what depression was. Mental health wasn't a conversation happening when I was growing up. I, in my book, talk about how I think that the South added to that. The South is very much white picket fence. We go to church, we go to youth group, you play sports, you make good grades. It's all about outside appearances. So I think the fact that like the 10 Commandments say, honor thy mother and father and don't drink, and all of those things do play a part in why my parents decided I needed a behavior modification program. The other thing is, and I always call this it was almost like a Ponzi scheme, that when I went to my educational consultant, I don't know, and this is actually something I never actually have harped on too much with my parents, but I was originally going to a regular boarding school. And then I had, a consultation. I don't know what my parents' original intentions were with me having that consultation, but I ended up having like a fight with my mom in the parking lot. The woman saw, and so she recommended I go to her son's school. So it was kind of this perfect storm of, you have this industry that's thriving at the time and nobody knows about it. You have a child who's acting out and kind of falling apart and battling different things that nobody understands how to fix. And then you have a woman whose son just started a school for problem children. So I think it was the perfect storm of, that's where Elizabeth's going.
Do you think that she was involved in some of these kickback schemes that they have for recommending children go to certain programs?
I mean, so I don't know for sure. She passed away, I forget what year, but I learned that when I was researching for my book. But if I had to guess, just based off the fact I certainly did not need to be at a school, I would say my gut instinct, which is not based off fact, is 100% yes. I can't, if you told me she wasn't, it would, I mean, you might make me drop to the floor.
After your parents make that decision, how is it that you find yourself in that first wilderness program, and what was that overall experience like?
I had one of these horror stories that you've probably heard about from so many people at this point. I had two strangers come into my bed in the middle of the night and quite literally kidnap me from my own home. I actually 2 nights ago picked up Stolen, and I haven't read it since, I don't know, since I was working on it. And I don't know what, it's because it was sitting by my bed. I reread the prologue and like 3 pages of chapter 1. And the prologue is the kidnapping. And I was like, wow, like that really happened. So yeah, I was quite literally kidnapped. My mother took my brother and sister out of town, which at the time I didn't really think anything of it. I think I was just happy that, one of my parents is gone. And they yanked me out of my bed, didn't tell me where I was going. And the next thing I knew, I was in a trailer, outside of the Appalachian Mountains getting strip searched. And therefore began the long journey of wilderness programs and therapeutic boarding schools.
The fact that your mum was not in town didn't raise any questions for you at the time, but there's a part in the book where you reflect on that and wonder if she made that decision because she may have perhaps caved in and allowed you to stay in the home instead of allowing the goons to take you away.
Well, that was because originally my parents were going to take me themselves. And I had no idea, but they picked me up. They told me we were going to church. I had slept at a friend's house, and we missed the turn for me to like change clothes and go to church. It was just very weird. I just knew something was off. So I happened to turn around and notice my baby blanket and my clothes and a pillow are in the car. None of these things that you need to go to church. And I freak out. It just becomes like, where the fuck are you taking me? And, excuse my French, but that's the language I was using. I get it out of my dad, or I thought I got it out of him, that I'm going to summer camp to like kind of an outward bound program to make s'mores and whitewater raft and just get out of town. But it just wasn't sitting right. Not to mention, even if it had been that, I didn't want to do that either. We get in a whole big debacle, and on the freeway of South Carolina, I attempt to jump out of the car, going full speed on the freeway. Also, do not realize there is a police car behind us, who then proceeds to see this. My dad, obviously rips me back in the car by my arm and thinks that I'm a kidnapped child trying to escape. The irony of that, because I didn't end up getting kidnapped, is now in hindsight kind of funny, but they pull us over. I tell them I've been kidnapped. My parents tell them what's really going on. But after that whole situation, I did manage to, I guess, manipulate and bully my mother into taking me home. And I think because that happened, I don't know if she decided on her own to go out of town, or if the therapist and the educational, like the program was like, you should, so I don't know who made that decision for her, but I'm pretty sure because of the freeway debacle that my mother left, so I couldn't manipulate her again.
Once you arrive at the wilderness program, what are your first impressions? How long do you think you will be expected to stay? And in comparison, how long does that actually last for?
Well, so they kind of give you false hope the whole time you're there. I at first thought I would go home in 4 weeks, maybe at best I'd be there a month. And then it was 6 weeks I thought I'd be there. And they give you hope that possibly you could go home and not go to a boarding school. Each day I kind of thought, like, I'm going to leave soon. The next letter is going to be it. And at a certain point, you do realize, well, I mean, I guess 1 in a million kids did get to go home. So if you happen to be in a group with that kid and see that, it's kind of heartbreaking when you're not going to as well. But at a certain point, you realize that you're not going home. You get the letter that says you're going to boarding school and this is where you're going. And you read it to the group. And, you've already heard rumors about each school and what they're known for. Like, this one's known for wilderness, like horseback riding. And this one's known for, this was the fancy one. But I thought I would be there a month and I ended up being there over 3 months. It was a lot. My parents left me there for a long time.
I wonder if the children that did get to go home within 4 weeks, if that was by design in terms of the continuation of the false hope for the rest of you that had to stay for longer.
No, if a child got to go home, it was not because the wilderness recommended they went home. That was, I don't know if it was financial for the parents or they got cold feet. If a child went home that quick and didn't go to a school, that was something the parents decided. That there is zero chance the wilderness or the schools recommended a child would go home.
And when you say you were out in the woods, you were literally out in the woods.
Yeah, it's funny because when I was doing the audiobook, I'm so used to saying I slept in a tent. And then I was like, but I didn't sleep in a tent. I slept in a tarp, which is like a makeshift tent. But quite literally, I slept with a tarp above my head and I'd put one on the ground and we learned how to like tie the knots to set the tarp up. We had used the bathroom in a hole. We showered with like this weird, it's called a billy bath with this weird bag and you get water from the creek and you like just dump it over your head. And we had camp suds, which have like 102 uses. You can wash your clothes with them and brush your teeth with them and your body. You can do anything with these camp suds. So I fully lived in the woods. We ate, if we could start a fire, they had us, busting. So it was a stick or like a bow drilling. So it was a stick, a spindle, a top rock, a bow, and so if you could get an ember and blow it into flames, you could eat hot. Otherwise, we ate ramen noodle right off the block. We ate beans hydrated in cold, like lukewarm water. So they would actually hydrate in your stomach and get you really sick. But we really roughed it for a long time. I didn't look in a mirror. I didn't shave my legs. It's wild to think about today.
What would the staff do if there were any extreme changes in weather?
Oh, so if like a thunderstorm happened while we were hiking, we would just stand. It was like, we'd put our packs in the middle of the trail, for instance, and we'd be like a certain number of feet apart. And we'd just sit on our packs in the rain and get drenched and but we'd have to keep saying our numbers so they could hear us, to know we haven't run away in the middle, use this thunderstorm to run away. But we would just sit there and get drenched. If it thundered, even if you had your shelter, if a thunderstorm came, you couldn't sit in it. You had to go sit in a safe place, which meant, not under a tree, not where you're, can't sit tied up to a tree. So you sat in the rain and got poured on. It did rain one night. I talk about this in the book. I never forgot this night. Today, I like vividly remember this, that I put my tarp in like a ravine, thinking it would be comfortable, like not thinking it would rain. And of course it rained. It wasn't storming, it was just raining. So we were able to sleep. And I swear, like an entire river came through my shelter. Everything was soaked. My sleeping bag, my clothes. they don't care. So it's my fault that I slept in a, something like that, which they tell you not to do. So I had to take a trash bag and like put it around me to stay warm that night. And over the next few days, I would lay my sleeping bag out on hike breaks to dry. But I had to use all wet stuff until my stuff dried. It's not like they had new stuff brought in to me, or I don't know, did something to help. I had to rely on Mother Nature to dry my stuff in between hiking and different things.
And you mentioned letters as well. And these would be letters you would have to write to your counselors, to your parents, like small tasks that the staff would set for you to complete each week?
Yeah, we had to write. I mean, none of these were fun because they really drill to write, expose yourself. And half the times they were making me write things that weren't even true. But if they decided you were a whore, then you needed to follow suit and just say you were a whore. So you're writing letters to your dad being like, I'm a whore, I had sex with this guy. Even if you didn't, I, did all of these things. We had to write a life story. But before you could send them to your parents, they would read them and see if they believed them or if there was enough stuff in it, which is why you ended up putting lies in it, because they would be like, you're lying, it's just everything. And then we had to write, they wrote us impact letters. We had to write, so a life story and then an accountability letter, which is, now I'm going to take accountability for any time I did anything from stealing $1 from your purse to throwing up my dinner to kissing a boy to sneaking out. And when I would write those, I would just sit there and make things up because I knew it had to be so long and so bad. So I would just say I snuck out 10 times. I'd be like, I snuck out 75 times. Everything, I just beefed it up because I realized when I tried being honest there, they, isolated me from the group and put me in isolation and didn't let me talk to anyone because there was no way I was a virgin and there was no way I'd never tried this drug or that drug. And until I could come to terms with who I am and be honest about it. So you just start making up anything. And so by the end of it, your parents truly believe they're sending this much crazier kid than who you really are to a program.
Do you think that was typical of other participants of the program?
Yeah.
To make things up in the same way?
I've asked people if they did. Everyone, the answer is collectively yes.
So after your 3 months are up and you are back in the trailer that you kind of first saw when you arrived in the woods, are you still thinking at this point that there's a chance you can go home, or do you know you're going straight on to the boarding school?
No, I know I'm definitely not going home because the same escorts who took me to the woods took me to the school. I think that anyone they thought that would work really hard to manipulate their parents or might try to run away, whatever it was, those people, the program recommended the parents use escorts as opposed to picking them up themselves. And my parents obviously were told to use escorts. So I did not see my parents for another, I think, 3.5 months until the first time they were allowed to come to my school, which ended up being in Virginia. It was called Carlbrook.
So once you arrive at Carlbrook, what are your first impressions and what are the first few experiences that you have on arrival?
So the first thing that happened when I got to Carlbrook was I arrived to the carriage house, which I guess is pretty much like the intake trailer at the woods. And I was strip searched. I had to cough and squat and do the whole thing again. And this time in front of not only the staff, but students too, which was really humiliating because I'd never even met them. And then, so that was the first sign that I knew this was not going to be okay. While the school looked beautiful, it looks like Harvard, and like the lawn was like perfectly manicured. It was so polar opposite to the woods. It had a white picket fence and these beautiful stone buildings. It was very Southern, where I had, very much like where I'd come from. And between the strip searching and then that night at something called Last Light, which is like the evening meeting, the headmaster spoke, and he had a very very narcissistic, God-like mentality about him. You would almost think he was a preacher in a church, the way he spoke, and he was like a prophet. But while he spoke, I noticed that all the kids were smushing, which is essentially where you have to cuddle with your classmates. It's like kind of like dominoes, but with cuddling, and you'll see in one person's lap, you'll see like two heads, and in that person's stomach has another head, and it's staff and it's students, and everyone's like scratching each other's head. And it made me really uncomfortable. I'm not great with touch to this day. Obviously, if I'm very, it's once if I'm seeing whatever, but there is a whole like thing. I'm not just very with just anybody. And I swear smushing has a lot to do with it. But if it made you uncomfortable and you tried to opt out, they would make it a therapeutic assignment and force you to cuddle with each other. And then smushing did not just happen at Last Light. So if we had an abusive exercise in a workshop where we, were pretty much physically beating each other up, or I was, giving each other funerals and writing obituaries for ourselves and whatnot. After this exercise, after I've berated you and told you you're a whore and you should die, then I have to cuddle with you. So it was this very confusing thing where 1 minute I have to hate you and literally vote you to die or not. And then the next minute I have to cry and you have to let me. It was a very sick thing. And that's how I knew that I was in trouble.
The headmaster that you mentioned, he's not the education consultant's son. That's a different person.
The educational consultant's son was the founder of the school. We really only saw him when something really bad happened. There were three founders, but really two. In the book, there's one, you can only have so many characters for people to be able to follow, but both of which went to a therapeutic program when they were young. That was very abusive. Believe it or not, the headmaster from my school worked at their school.
What's the name of the headmaster that you give in the book?
Alan. You only see him if you're in trouble. Alan is your day-to-day. He's the face of the school. He goes into workshops with you. He comes into group with you. You have to cuddle with him at Last Light.
And it comes across that he really relishes the opportunity to implement himself in as many activities as possible throughout the school.
Yes, he did. I think he found great pleasure in breaking people down and lying to himself that part of him was building them back up. He's a very sick man in my mind. Some of the people who have been to these programs, I'm like, well, I have a little compassion for you because you were abused in one of these yourself and you're repeating the cycle of abuse. But when I look at him, I have a really hard time finding any compassion because you're just a fucking child abuser. You just abuse children. You abused at-risk minors, and it feels like it's for fun. And you've done it at school after school after school. And I have done so much research, other books, blogs, Reddit chains, survivor groups, podcasts, you name it. Anywhere there's a conversation, I've read it. The claims of him being abusive and the things he does are not specific to my school. The stories are at all the schools. There's students from every school claiming he abused them and saying the exact same things, versions of it, even worse things. It's not the boy who cried wolf, because there are thousands of kids out there saying the same thing from different states and different schools and different eras. So at a certain point, I hope everyone understands where the problem lies.
And is it typical that a lot of the staff members employed at Carlbrook are they of a certain level of education or qualification?
There were no real qualifications. Like some of the staff was qualified and others were not even licensed therapists. It really, I don't know if it's still there, but there used to be a website, I believe it was called Heal, that basically, if you looked at a therapeutic boarding school, it would tell you a list of the staff members and if they were licensed or not. And you'd see a trend at most of these schools that the staff wasn't licensed, at least a huge chunk of them. And if you're going to talk to force a child to talk about rape and abuse and divorce and drugs and death, and I mean, some of the stories I heard of what kids had gone through were heartbreaking. And if you're going to force someone to go into that, I sincerely hope that you are licensed and know how to help them actually process the trauma. There's a reason that so many kids in these places struggle when they leave or take their own life or have worse addictions, because you're forced to look at all of these different things and then not given the proper tools to work through them, because the person who's forcing you to do this has no right to be guiding you, taking you there.
That's actually a perfect way to kind of lead us into talking about what life looked like for you after you left Carlbrook. I know that in Stolen, there's a lot of detail on the diets that the students are placed on, the clothing that you are expected to wear, the punishments that you'll endure if you don't complete therapeutic assignments or if you aren't dressing the way that you're supposed to. And there's lots of stuff that we've heard before about coat hangers having to be specifically, like 1 or 2 finger widths apart. And there's so much great stuff around the environment of totalistic control in Carlbrook. And if anybody wants to really gain a clear insight into that, then please go and pick up a copy of Stolen and just have a read, because it helped give me such a more of a rounded view of the industry itself, just from the beginning to the end. But your journey out of the so-called therapeutic boarding school was not an easy one. So I kind of wanted to just use our last 10 minutes to ask you if you could talk the listeners through that.
Yeah, so I'll first say to this that I wanted to include everything in this book, but in order to get the rich details of what really goes on in these programs, there was no more room to put anything else from after. And it was really important to me that all the details of these places were out there, from the things we had to wear to the things we had to do to the day-to-day life, to the backstory of Synanon and where these cults came from and the fact that people weren't licensed. And so by the time, and I feel like I did a really good job even picking and choosing what went in, but by the time I finished that, I was at a full page count of a book. So I brush on after, and the way it not only affected myself, but my classmates, and we all have different, some people are on the same page as me and some people disagree with me, and that's just the reality. But when I got out, I really struggled. So when I went in, I had smoked pot, tried Molly once, was a virgin. I was very angry, as I said, not to be repetitive, but and I had been in the wrong place at the wrong time a few times. Car wreck. It's not to say I was an angel, but when I got out, I did everything. And there wasn't a drug I didn't try. I mean, maybe there's 1 or 2 drugs I didn't try, but I became heavy into drugs and cocaine. And then at one point it was pills. The time that I should have died was not, like, my parents' fear that if I didn't go to Carlbrook, I would die, was not really, I understand why they had it, especially after that car wreck that I get in the beginning of the book. But the fact that I am alive after Carlbrook, because then I really did become heavy into drugs, getting car accidents as a result of drugs, all these different things. I realized I basically became who they said I was going to. So when they were beating me up and all the kids were saying, you're a whore, you're a drug addict, you shouldn't be alive, you're a disappointment, I basically lived out, I don't know, consciously, subconsciously, a version of both, exactly who they said I was going to be. And I did nothing with my life. And I found myself like constantly running and chasing some meaning to my life and being unable to find it. And there would be moments where I would be okay, where I would get a job at Vogue or here, and I would hold myself kind of together, meaning I would still be doing drugs and whatever for a minute. And then it would crash and burn, and something would happen, or I'd have a miscarriage, like happened at the end of my book. And suddenly I would be falling apart and not having the tools to deal with it. At these programs, they teach you that when you deal with trauma, you scream and attack people and you beat things up and you get on fake lifeboats and, and you're forced to do it. This isn't like going to one of these treatment centers that I hear adults check themselves into for a weekend, and apparently you do some of these exercises. When you're forced to do that and be so brutal, and if you just told me you were abused brutally in a very specific way, and 5 minutes later I'm telling you that you were abused because you're a whore, that's going to do something to a person, especially a 15-year-old child. So I think what happened to myself and pretty much all of my classmates is we lived out who the staff and each other, who we told each other we were going to be. There was a moment in time where I think all of us, well, myself especially, where I wanted to be near the alumni when I first got out. And then it just became too traumatic and triggering. And I wanted to erase that time of my life completely. So I cut out anyone I knew that went there. I didn't talk to anyone. I just did drugs. I partied. I numbed myself as much as I possibly could and built this, what I thought was this whole new life. And I thought I had written my life story basically out of my own life. And maybe if I got high on Coke, it might come up that I'd been through this crazy experience. But otherwise, people who had been in my life for years had no idea of what I had been through. I mean, my closest friends, as I started the process of healing and writing this book and doing these various things, obviously knew. But if you didn't know me intimately well, when this book came out, it was probably very shocking because you don't know, maybe you knew a blip of it, or you saw me high and didn't know why I was such a mess, or it was quite shocking. And even the people who knew me well and my parents, while they knew it destroyed me, they didn't know the details. It's not like I sit down with people on a regular basis and let them into my diary, a lot of these things I've only ever written. I don't, I'm sure you've had other people on this podcast that have said that, but a lot of the times when you put this book out or whatever version you're telling your story in, that's the first time you've really put that out there, like being so specific.
I think it's an incredible thing, though, offering that really intimate look into your life to people that have been around you all the time, and to people like me, perfect strangers, to give us the opportunity to really understand the experiences that you have had, but that others will still be having, and knowing that there has to be some type of institutional change like across the world in terms of regulations. And
that's the thing. I think that, the reason I wanted to put this book out there was to do my part in having the story out there. I say at the beginning, if it helps one kid, I will know that I've done my part. And it's already helped far more than one. There are kids that have not been sent to these schools because their parents read the book, or they've been pulled out of a program. And I've met some of the kids, believe it or not. I've also had, while some people are not happy the book is out there, I have had people reach out to me and tell me that I went to the school with, or had lost touch with, or don't know at all. Thank you. Because now I can hand this book to my parents, to my girlfriend, to my spouse, whoever it is, my friends, and be like, this is what I've been going through. This is what I went through. And now they have an understanding, but I don't have to relive it and telling them.
That's amazing.
In terms of fixing the problem, these institutions need regulations. Pretty much every industry in the world is regulated, from healthcare to schools, you name it, it's regulated. And there is no reason that an industry who profits off of helping at-risk minors shouldn't be regulated. If anything, it should be at the top of the list to regulate, because these are kids who are prone to be at risk for harming themselves, harming people around them, taking their own lives, maybe not intending to take their own life, but it ending with that. These are people that should be handled with care, with kid gloves, with love. These are people that are children that should have their, I guess, their human rights. I think if we regulated the schools, these kids would never be kept from being able to go outside. Even in prison, you're in, solitary confinement, you get your time outside. Depriving people of food and books and human contact and being able to call their parents. These are not things that should be allowed to take from someone, and they're not allowed anywhere else. But for whatever reason, they are allowed in these schools, and that needs to be regulated, and that needs to be changed.
That's such a powerful thing to finish on. I know we've hit our time limit today, and I'm so appreciative of you allowing me the opportunity to read your book, to feature it 1 month on the monthly memoir
Thank you
giveaway.
So much. I'm grateful we did it not once but twice.
Yes, and also to be able to give this interview to other people, even though we did have a lengthier one before, and I'm so sorry again about that. But
No. I feel bad that I'm in the middle of trying to write the next thing. So hopefully we can talk again and we'll get a third
I would love that. That's really exciting. I would just like to end on one question, Elizabeth, before we say goodbye today. Yeah. And that is
I'm like, by the way, I forget what your last question is. So this is good, because it'll be like you're asking it for the first time. I remember you had one, but I can't remember what it was.
It's just to ask you if you feel as though your life would have gone down the road it went in terms of drugs and acting out behavior if you hadn't gone to Carlbrook.
I probably said a version of this last time. I don't know, because obviously I was dabbling in some drugs. So I'm sure there would have been some of it, but would it have gone to the extent that it did, where many people who saw me years later being normal couldn't believe that I was normal, because I had been so bad? I have no way of knowing, but I'd like to think no. I'd like to think I would have gone on to play sports or get a real job, or I don't know. But that being said, if my life hadn't become my life, I don't think I would have written a book or been able to, give my story to the world. So while I don't think anyone should have to go through this, my hope is that what my experience has done, because I was strong enough to get through it and strong enough to survive it and kind of start processing it. I think that it happened so I could help other people, so that I could be one of the success stories that, helps the people who have already been through it know that there is light at the end of the tunnel, or the people who are going through it now, and you can overcome this and you can make something good from it. And, if you haven't been through it yet, I hope this shows people maybe how not to deal with mental health. So yeah, I don't know what my life would have been, but this has given me the opportunity to help people, which I don't know if I would have had otherwise. I don't even know if I would have left South Carolina.
And where can people find their own copy of Stolen or any of the other writing that you are doing?
So right now, only Stolen is out, and it is on Audible. I narrated it. Seen mixed reviews on my narration skills. Amazon, local bookstores, Kindle. I think it's just about everywhere. And the paperback came out about a month ago. So now you can get it in hardback, paperback, all different versions. Yeah, and hopefully at some point there will be another book out there of, what's next.
That's so exciting. I'll put some links in the episode description so that people can easily find copies of Stolen. And I did listen to the audio book and read the book as well. And the audiobook is
so sweet.
It's very emotional at parts, which is why I think it's so impactful when the author reads their own memoir. So I could tell it must have been a difficult thing, but very, very powerful. So thank you so much for your time today, Elizabeth. I appreciate you, and I hope that you enjoy the rest of your day.
Of course.